Today, I'm speaking with America's signature songwriter. He's composed some of the world's most beloved music. By the time you get to Phoenix, Wichita Lineman, Galveston, MacArthur Park, Up and Away. He's had numerous Grammys. He's inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. It's my honor to introduce Jimmy Webb. Jimmy, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me today.
Thank you, Elliot. My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. We're here in the Palace Theater in Manchester, New Hampshire for your new tour. It's the Glen Campbell years. So what is your goal for the show? What do you expect the audience to take away from the show?
Well, first of all, I guess I should say that the show is a tribute to a friend. Primarily, it's done under the auspices of Glen's family, which was really my family too. All of our kids grew up together, so they know I'm doing the show, and in fact, they've been to see it quite a bit. I've been doing it for about 3 years now, and it morphs and it changes. And I actually, my private conceit is that it gets better and better. It's like a film in many ways, except that it's an interactive film. I actually do a couple of duets with Glen.
Oh, that's awesome.
Up on stage. We have that synchronized, and sometimes I think I actually feel him around.
Oh, that's awesome. How sweet.
I know that sounds, very Shirley MacLaine, but
no.
Anyway,
hey, Paul McCartney just did this with John Lennon. Come on.
I have this feeling sometimes on stage that Glen's standing behind me, because he used to always stand behind me and look at my hands, because he played from my hands.
Yeah, you said he's very good at.
Thing.
Yeah, you said he's able to look at what you play on the piano and convert it to guitar immediately.
Yeah, he can instantaneously, very complicated things.
How does somebody do that?
Somebody once said that guitar and piano are like church and state, but they definitely speak different languages. But where Glen and I were concerned, there was only one language, and that was, music. Great chords, great melodies. We found a place to work together where our political differences, whatever those may have been or might be, that wasn't a consideration. Religion was left out. Egos were left out. It was just a playing field where Glenn said like this, it just fit. I have him on film doing that.
Oh, good.
But there was some sort of natural attraction between my songs and his voice. There was a definite magnetism there.
You said something to the effect of, he's a great interpreter of your music.
Well, the best, probably the best. And I remember hearing my first Glen Campbell record when I was 14 years old, out in the middle of a wheat field in Oklahoma, doing some agricultural work. And he was singing a song called Turn Around, Look at Me, written by a guy named Jerry Capehart. But I've been told that Glen did a lot of the writing on that. And that doesn't surprise me, because Glen has been everywhere and done everything.
Oh, yeah.
And the show is very much about the bandwidth of his character, and where you had extraordinary musicianship on one hand as a guitarist, and on the other hand, a voice that was really unparalleled, 5 octaves,
right.
Absolute perfection, but still soulful, still plaintive, still seductive in many, many ways. Not just perfect, but a little better than perfect.
I would agree with that. I'm so sorry I never got to see him live myself.
His live performances were spectacular, because he could really do all this stuff.
Right, he was a real
He wasn't
real musician.
faking it.
Nothing at all. No.
He never faked anything. So, a kind of a rocky start, because I talk about in my show about the first thing that he ever said to me, which was, "When are you going to get a haircut?" And that sort of says a lot about the relationship in the 60s.
Right. Right.
But how was I to know that, we were going to be friends for 50, 60 years, and that I would, that the last chapter of his life would be this rather heroic struggle with
Right.
a very awful disease called Alzheimer's. And my wife Laura and I, we were with the family hand in hand while this, what Campbell says, the long goodbye, while this process
It's really
works,
awful.
works.
My mom died of Alzheimer's as well.
So works its way out. And the caregivers, those are the ones
They
who
take
are
it on
really
the
the
chin.
victims.
Yeah, they certainly are.
So the show is about that in a way. But I think that, let me say more to the point, that I think that in our society, and I'm not shy about sharing my opinions, if you haven't figured that out
You've
already.
never been before, so.
But I think that in our society, we forget people too quickly. There's a crawl on the CNN, Joe Cocker died, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember him. Yeah, I get by with a little help from my
Right.
friends. Woodstock, the guy doing this. And, if you just turn to page 2, you would find out that he was a big bear, a gentle, loving guy, and that he spent the greater part of his life helping people recover from
Oh, wow.
from drugs and alcohol, and a great deal of his personal fortune helping people who were trying to restructure their lives. So
Right, that doesn't normally always come out.
so that's not going to come out.
Right.
Not in this society, not in a 24-hour news cycle.
No.
So, and certainly in Glen's case, it was a very spectacular,
Public.
ending.
Yeah.
Ballyhoo, really, about how he was dying and so on and so forth. To me, it became noxious after a while. It was too much.
I'll bet.
But he wanted to go out playing the guitar. When they diagnosed the disease and said, well, you've got Alzheimer's and you're going to forget everything. And he said, well, I'm not finished yet. And that's a quote, I'm not done yet, something to that effect. And then promptly went out on tour with Ashley Campbell, his daughter, Cal, playing drums, Shannon on rhythm guitar, Shannon Webb Campbell. All of our kids are all mixed up. It's really one big family at this point. So it's intense. This is an intense thing. And the thing that I was thinking as I came over here that I wanted to get across, definitely in this interview, if not in any other, because I'm sitting on the stage and I'm getting ready to do the show, is that this is in no way like a marketing ploy. This is not like a way of getting money from the
Cashing
public
in, right.
to cash in on this thing. This is like a very heartfelt, like intimate
Tribute.
a sharing of who he was, encompassing him both as a father and a musician and as a friend and as a very important and wonderful human being.
Well, I'm looking forward to the tribute because two of my favorite songs are the ones that you collaborated on with him, Wichita Lineman and Galveston.
Oh, thank you.
I'd love to dive into Wichita a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. I know that he asked for you to write the song, and you did, at least most of it, and you gave it to him, but it wasn't complete. But they went off and recorded it anyway.
It came as a surprise to me.
So what happened when you first heard it? You heard what he did in the last verse.
Well, I didn't know what to expect. Really, I knew that it was going to be a great record. Quite honestly, Al DeLore and Glen were a great team.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Al sort of gets pushed into third or fourth place, but Al was really quite a genius.
Mm.
And if you listen to his string arranging,
it's beautiful.
by the time we get to Phoenix and Wichita,
They're all just tremendous.
It's elegant. It's not overwrought. There's not a lot of rococo. There's not a lot of glissandos and trills.
I personally find it cinematic, too.
Yeah, it's very
I love that.
it's very minimalist. before music was minimalist, Al was making these very, I tell you what it did over the long run, it really made the song timeless, the arranging did. So Al,
good observation.
Al really, he was a bit heavy contributor to the success of all this.
But two things. So first of all, Carol Kay makes this great introduction on the bass.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't do that. So when you heard it, what'd you think?
Well, I thought it was a very good record. I actually ended up playing on the record.
Okay.
I put the organ part, the kind of electronic thing. I had an organ that, this was before synthesizers and before sampling and before, 90% of the fun that we had in this recording studio was subverting ordinary objects into things that would make noises that we wanted to.
Right.
I remember at one point over at Universal Recorders, I was ripping 2x4s with a 3/4 inch Craftsman radial
Circular
saw.
Okay.
And ripping them lengthwise because I could get a really long note like that. And then I would take that, transfer it over to a variable speed oscillator, VSO we had, which was kind of like a tuner is today. Not quite. I don't want to get into the technical aspect of it. It was fairly primitive, but the stuff we did to create sounds was that was the drug. That was the feel good, working for days with Hal Blaine to get the perfect shaker sound, and finding out that the perfect shaker sound was birdshot in a foam cup.
A foam cup.
Yeah.
How far from the microphone?
Oh, that far. Just very delicate, very soft. Not shakers like this.
Right, yeah.
Just like this, and it would just exactly what you wanted, The Wrecking Crew, Glen was a founding member of the Wrecking Crew. And so really you got into this club, you almost by accident, but one day I just found myself sitting there. I think I was playing the piano and Larry Knechtel was playing organ, or the other way around, and ended up sitting in so many sessions with the guys. Really was mentored by Larry Knechtel. I was very, very disturbed to hear about his passing 3-4 years ago, I guess. Got to be very, very close with all of them. And just the experimentation, the whole thing, the fun that you can hear on an album like Sgt. Pepper, for instance, where they broke into the BBC sound effects vault and they pulled out all the old bands and everything. And you can just imagine how much fun they were having going through these old tapes and sticking them on their record, because literally, the BBC has everything.
They had everything, that's right.
So in a way it describes the whole era in music when we were just short of being able to do everything, and we were still able to experiment. Phil Spector was turning elevator shafts into echo chambers.
Yeah.
Repurposing, and it's just the kick that guys get with messing around with old cars.
Yeah, you said this in other interviews where the actual, we've lost the art of having a studio. The studio had its own live performance sound. It was part of the records. Today,
it was an instrument.
It was an instrument. There you go.
Because multi-track recording was really a new instrument. It was a new way of organizing music. I don't think we realized it, because I think if we had realized what it would have scared us to death. Because it was really the precursor to unlimited tracks. 8-track or 24-track and unlimited tracks changes the way you approach recording.
That's right. So let's talk about it a little bit, because MacArthur Park is an amazing piece of music that, as I understand it, you were challenged to do something a little classical for the pop.
No, it was strictly described before I wrote it.
So as you were writing the piece, you were thinking of all the instruments at the time, or you were
by Bones Howe. He wanted it for the association, and he described it as a classical piece with rock and roll, a classical piece with like a rock fusion sound to it.
But you started, what, on the piano and just had some ideas and...
Yeah, it was for the association. I like the association.
Yeah, great group, yeah.
In fact, just in passing, I don't know, one of my favorite things that is Along Comes Mary.
Yep.
And that's Glen. That's Glen's intro.
Okay.
That whole very classical thing at
Yes.
the beginning. That's him.
I didn't know that. Nice.
So many things that you hear on records are Glen.
As you were, though, putting together MacArthur Park, you were taking advantage. You did that in separate sessions, like you laid down certain instruments and built it up over time.
It was the wrecking crew all the way, and you can go back and check this if you want, but we did it in one take.
No way.
Yeah, we did.
Well, I guess that's not surprising. They're very good.
We rehearsed it for a couple hours, but we did the whole all the transitions, everything. We did it in one take.
Amazing.
And then we recorded it again, but we ended up going back and using the first tape.
So did you take that tape to England then to get Richard Harris to?
I overdubbed. We overdubbed strings at Armin Steiner's up on Yucca and Argyle sound recorders, and I was like flying. Get this. This was quite a lot of fun, really. I was like flying the Concorde back and forth,
Oh my God.
and carrying the boxes under my wing, and maybe it wasn't the Concorde. Maybe I just want it to be the Concorde.
Yeah, but still, it's a little bit of it could be nerve-wracking carrying around the master tapes,
It could have been
right?
the Concorde. But
Okay.
anyway,
Let's pretend it was a
you're
Concorde.
sitting on a plane, and you've got this huge box, and it's very hard to look nondescript.
Don't pay
because-
attention to the man with the box.
Yeah. Even though it may be, God forbid, a bomb, but I mean, you have this huge thing, and you have to carry it by hand, because we were apoplectic in those days, afraid that X-ray machines
Oh,
would
we
damage
destroyed
our
this
tape.
tape, right? Yeah.
And so it was hand carried and babied, and then Richard and I went into a studio in the London suburbs called Lansdowne, which is really just a hole in the wall, tiny but very private. And we did all the vocals, which was quite a task.
Well, I was going to say challenge.
It was a challenge for him. He was not used to that kind of recording. He wasn't used to earphones.
Oh, really? That's
Overdubbing it.
Did you feel his voice was a little difficult for him to do the reach on some of the notes? Or?
Sometimes it was.
I mean, beg your pardon, but I really love Glen singing that song.
Yeah, no, Glen does a great job. Glen used to close his Vegas shows with MacArthur Park.
Did he? Okay.
And he would take the fast section.
That's right. Yeah.
And just he would
Shred,
like
right?
absolutely let the dogs loose, because he never really played out much. But when
That's a good place for him to play.
he
out,
could
right?
really unleash some amazing chops.
There was something else I had seen an interview that you did with talking about Glen, that when you would write a song, you'd play it for him, and he would know instantly whether it's going to be a hit or not.
Well, yes. Within parameters, he had a very, very good record for picking hit songs. And one of the songs that he picked as a Stone Cold smash was Highwayman.
Right.
And
Which he recorded.
well, he did. But he didn't do it with Capitol. He took it over to Capitol, and they wanted him to cut something else. And he quit Capitol
Over that song, right.
Highwayman.
Yeah. Then he took it to the...
It was at Glen Campbell Music in Nashville, and Marty Stewart had a cousin over there named Marty Gamblin, and they're looking for music for this session with Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, Johnny Cash, and Willie Nelson. And the sessions aren't going that well because there's not much of a blend between the voice. I mean, it's a great gathering,
But they didn't
but
mesh,
the
right?
result it doesn't fit that well.
But they wanted it to.
But Chip's Moman was like pulling his hair out, looking for material. And Glen said, looky here, you know, there's 4 guys, there's 4 verses.
Right.
So they don't have to blend. They can just each sing their verse. So it was really made in
perfect.
heaven for them.
And it's a great song.
And they did it, and the concept worked.
Yes.
And
They embraced that
and
too,
the
right?
arrangement worked. And well, story is that Willie is into reincarnation.
Oh,
And always has been since he was a kid.
so he was in on the song right away.
Well, that's what the grapevine says. But they really weren't sure what Johnny Cash's reaction was going to be.
But
Well, he listened very patiently to all 4 verses, and then they're all sitting there waiting to see what's going to happen. And he said, well, I want to fly the starship, you know? And it was like hooping and hollering. Finally, they found a song they could cut.
and it did very
And
well.
of course, it did okay.
It did okay. You got a Grammy for it. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing song. That's so cool. There was something that Leland Sklar said. I guess you had him working on some of your records, and
I love the guy.
Fantastic bass player. But his quote was, "You have a lot of chords," and he said, "You're very hard to jam with because you go off into all these directions." Did you guys actually go into the studio and jam together? Is that part of what you
Well, you know, I don't know. You know, point taken. You know, I mean, Keith Urban said about me one time. He said, Jimmy Webb, 12 chords and the truth. But really, it's more like 40 or 50 or 60 chords. It's, you know, I'm into chords. Most of the studio stuff is not that complex.
Okay.
You don't get hits by really recording songs like MacArthur Park. It happens, obviously,
Yeah, it did.
but it's not a formula for success. You
No,
know, and usually the studio things, the things that they did, with some exceptions, were pretty much 3-chord wonders.
Right.
You know, and there were when they were working, and when I say they, I'm talking about the crew. When they were working on the Mamas and Papas, they had like 3 or 4 chords to play. All they had to worry about was the sound, getting the sound. I would go in there with those guys, and I was playing voices, and I'd say, no, the sus2, that's in the right hand, it's not in the left. You know, I'm sorting voicings for them, and they're scratching their heads and going,
Who is
what
this
are we
guy?
going to do with this guy? You know?
You have a great quote. The difference between a hit and a miss is something intangible.
Well, the way I like to picture it, and the way I would like for the listener to picture my answer, is that there are an infinite number of variables associated with the recording of any track by any artist. Okay. It's as many as you want to name. It's where was it cut? What studio? What city? What season was it? Was it winter? Was it summer? Who were the musicians? Did they have 2 rhythm players? Did they have just 1 guitarist? Was it a spur of the moment thing? Was it planned? Were there charts? Were there not charts?
All that adds up. Right?
All of it adds up at the end. And then you get into the post-production and you say, who was the rabbi at the label? Who was in charge of this record with ramming this one home, so to speak? And you find out that now you've blossomed into a logarithmic universe of possibility, because you've got some promotion guy in Cleveland who's the guy who actually broke the record. He went in and got the first station on it. And what was he doing that day? And who was he with the night before? And was he drinking or was he not drinking? And, you know, and the DJ who played it. So anyway, you can go crazy with this.
Yes.
The only thing that I can come up with is that a hit is something that affects a lot of people at the same time in the same way. That's what a hit is, because you don't just need one person to like it. You need you need numerical superiority here to have a hit.
Yes.
So there has to be something common. There has to be a code. It has to be something that will communicate itself to a large number of listeners in one go, because really that's all
That's all you get, right?
So, and then you've either got a hit or you've got a. And listen,
So-
I listen to records that I've cut, and I go, oh, this is a hit. This is a hit. And it's years later, and of course it wasn't a hit, but I'm still listening to it, and I'm hearing
should be a hit.
I'm hearing a hit, and so that's why I say you can't do it.
I got one more subject to ask you about.
Yeah.
You work with George Martin, and that must be a wonderful experience. Of course, we know him as the eminent producer for the Beatles. But the question I have is subtle. So you're the writer, you're in there, you're performing. So how does George handle pushing and shoving the music in a certain way in the studio for you? What does he offer up, and how does he control that?
Well, he's very subtle, and it's almost a British thing, a certain understatement, a certain dryness. You know, there's no shouting, there's no yelling, it's all very. I remember when he came to me one time when we were doing El Mirage together, and he said, Jimmy, he said, I've been thinking, and he said, I was wondering if you would, well, you're such a lovely chap, but I hate to ask, but I was wondering, could I do some of the arrangements?
Was that an
was
understated
George.
way of saying that I need to change something, right?
That's typical George, you know.
Nice.
And,
Okay.
Because
I always wondered, as a song, he hears the song and he goes, well, maybe in his mind he says, this is good, but this would be better.
Yeah,
I wonder,
yeah.
He
He
and I was
told
wondering
me
how
one time, he
communicated that.
said, this album, he says, it's a beautiful album, Jimmy, but he said, it's got no, you need some cute songs. You need a cute song and a couple of fast songs, you know. He was in touch with the balance of every track on the album. Well,
Right.
we don't really cut albums anymore.
Well, now,
so they
right.
say.
Yeah, but back then
But
they
the
did.
fact is, we do still cut albums, but we live in a world where there
tracks
is
are
no
extracted,
there is
yeah.
no truth. So they say no, that there's no such thing as an album anymore. And I look right in this camera and tell you that artists still cut albums. Don't be shocked. It's going to be very hard to dissuade artists over time from the notion that they're cutting an album. It's not just a press release.
Okay. Well, Jimmy, thank you so much. This was such a fun time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a great tour. I hope tonight's a good night for you. I'm very much looking forward to seeing your presentation with you and Glen.
It's been a great chat. And I'm sorry I couldn't go longer, but I think we're about to be overrun.
Yes. I got to clear my stuff from the stage.
Thank you.
Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right.